Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Nick here, and welcome to my review of Doctor Who Series 6, or Season 32, Episode 4, The Doctor's Wife. And I forgot to say Season 32 in the last two reviews, or at the very least in the first review of the series. I must always remember to say, also known as Season Insert Number, here for the future series, in the first review and in the ranking, maybe a few others as well. So, The Doctor's Wife. Before we get into this one, what do I think of Series 6 so far? We're 4 episodes in with this episode, so what do I think of the series so far? Well, after an interesting Christmas special, The Impossible Astronaut was a great way to get us in. However, I thought The Day of the Moon had a few moments, and ultimately it was a bit of a mixed bag. Overall, The Impossible Astronaut and Day of the Moon was a good story, but the second half was definitely quite mixed in places. But the first one was very good. And then The Curse of the Black Spot I also thought was a bit of a mess story. I thought that was alright, but it wasn't that great. So, how does The Doctor's Wife stand up in this series after a great first episode, a meh second episode with a few great moments in it, and a meh third episode with a few decent moments in it, and also an interesting Christmas special? Well, The Doctor's Wife is absolutely fantastic. This is a fantastic episode. Written by Neil Gaiman, this is his first of two scripts. The second one will be a Cyberman story next series. And it sees here, the plot sees this alien entity known as House send out a distress message via this little cube thing. You probably remember it from the War Games, although slightly altered this time round, because that one it was just a cube. This one it's a smaller cube with a light in it inside a bigger plastic or glass cube. And this particular one has the mark of the Corsair, a good friend of the Doctor's, who I may talk about in a moment. So House sends this thing off to attract the Doctor's TARDIS. So he, Amy, and Rory travel to this asteroid, where a sentient asteroid known as House, outside of the universe. So in a small, think of it as a big bubble, and there's a small bubble just outside it, and they're in the other universe is the small bubble. Okay, well, apparently it's not like that, but do try and imagine it like that. So the Doctor, Amy, and Rory travel to the outside of the universe. However, the TARDIS is then taken out of. It's then the soul, the Matrix, is taken out of the TARDIS itself and put into the body of a woman called Idris, played by Saran Jones. This then means that TARDIS can now kill and eat the TARDIS, whilst the consciousness then dies in a body. Safely without causing a rift in the whole universe. However, as the Doctor is the last Time Lord left, and there'll be no more TARDISes and Time Lords coming through, then House decides to hijack the TARDIS and travel into the other universe looking for more TARDISes and Time Lords, or to come up with a plan B if it cannot. And it's also got these patchwork people who have fallen through this rift, so not just Time Lords have come through, but other people. Think of it more as a plug hole. You know that giant plug hole from Planet of Giants, when the TARDIS crew would reduce to the size of an inch? Think of it as like they've fallen through that plug hole. So the Doctor has sent Amy and Rory to stay inside the TARDIS to be protected whilst he tries to find the Time Lords after he discovers some Time Lord messages when he fixes Ood Nephew's, an Ood called Nephew, his communicator device. Yeah, Nephew's also, an Ood has also fallen through the plug hole along with Auntie Uncle, two patchwork people, and Idris, who I do not believe is patchwork, but its body is then used by the TARDIS. The first 15 minutes set up this story absolutely brilliantly, with the Doctor going to look for his friend the Corsair, who he talks fondly about. It's also worth noting that this is the first time a Time Lord has been mentioned to change gender on screen, as the Doctor mentions the Corsair has had a few female incarnations, and calls them, or at least one of them, a bad girl. To be honest, knowing what we know about the Corsair from this episode and from further stuff like Neil Gaiman's thing written about it in the brilliant book 2012. It's a good book, and this is a really great page. As well as the Titan Comics 13th Doctor range, where one of the female Corsairs pops up. from what we know about the Corsair, they can be quite they're a bad person, but not a villain. Not a villain like the Master or the Rani. They're just a little bit naughty, a little bit cheeky, so to speak. A bit like if the meddling monk actually had a heart. Basically, if the meddling monk was actually was a ally, sort of a kind of a mix between Drax from the Armageddon Factor and the meddling monk, I suppose. So that's the Corsair, basically a rogue, so to speak. So he/she is a rogue. And the Doctor has, according to this page in the Doctor book, the Doctor has had a few encounters with them, including getting drunk with 2 of the male and 1 of the female incarnations a few times. It's quite funny, and the Titan Comics series has a couple of 13th Doctor Corsair adventures, well, one or two adventures over the course of a few issues. There's a brilliant video by the Whoniverse detailing the Corsair's life and goes into a bit of detail about the 13th Doctor Titan comics with the Corsair in it before we get to the Doctor's wife segment, because that is where the Corsair's story sadly comes to an end. Or if I say sadly, we don't really know an awful lot about it besides what we learn in the Brilliant Book 2012 and in Titan Comics. But unfortunately, we will not get to find out. Well, we could find out much more, but the Corsair's 9th incarnation, as according to the Brilliant Book 2012, and that page was written by Neil Gaiman, so it's canon. So, according to that, it's the 9th incarnation of the Corsair who has turned up on the asteroid. But it turns out that House and the Patchwork people not only have they hijacked the Corsair, but a couple of other Time Lords and Time Ladies as well, including one who sounds a lot like Paul McGann in that bit of the message when the Doctor fixes the Ude's orb. The Ude's orb. One of the messages the loudest one sounds like it's Paul McGann. I think before this episode came out, or after it came out, someone did a video thinking, "Oh, that sounds like Paul McGann." Could it be the 8th Doctor? Could the 8th Doctor be coming back? Could he be making an appearance? Well, it turns out the 8th Doctor's not in this one, which is probably for the best, because otherwise he probably would have died, and that would have meant the adventures afterwards would be a paradox, and I think that time war would be a lot worse than it already is. Mind you, if it was Paul McGann they did get in to do that voice work, because he does a lot of voice work for Big Finish, maybe they did get him in to do that. It's probably not likely, but it could be something to wishfully think. It's a wishful think. It's just fun, but it's probably not Paul McGann. But eventually the Doctor finds out that the Time Lords and Time Ladies he's heard were in fact the Q messages, the distress calls that he received. So he realizes, well, despite having his hopes up of finding some more Time Lords and hoping to be forgiven for the events of the Time War, as he establishes with Amy, he then finds out that there are still no more Time Lords left besides himself. This first quarter of the episode shows Matt Smith at his absolute best, going from the really excited when he first gets the Corsair box, being really interested on the planet on the asteroid when they get there, including the first meeting with Idris, who, after being the TARDIS consciousness being put into her, is a bit confused, but she'll get the hang of it eventually. Then starting to get more intrigued and excited once he hears the Time Lord communications. Fearing his friend's safety, he has them sent back to the TARDIS, although little does he know that that will be soon hijacked by House. And then he eventually discovers the truth, and you can see both his heartbreak and his despair at the same time, and then his snapping at Uncle and Auntie, definitely staying within the kind of distraught emotion range. I think Matt Smith manages to carry the emotions just absolutely perfectly throughout the entire episode, but this first quarter of an hour is where he is at his absolute best. I think this first quarter of an hour shows the brilliant range of emotions, especially when he discovers the truth. Whew, that was a moment. In fact, emotions are handled really well throughout this episode, as he soon when he soon confronts Idris and realizes she's the TARDIS, and throughout the rest of the episode, they have to work together. Well, but she doesn't have much long left in the body of a human, and House has now hijacked the TARDIS, so they have to make a junk TARDIS. This is the toy playset version of that. This junk TARDIS to try and catch up with the actual TARDIS now hijacked by House. Whilst that's all happening, Amy and Rory are trapped in the TARDIS, and in order to stay alive, they have to entertain House by running down the corridors. Now, presumably Neil Gaiman expected he wouldn't get much of a corridor set, so he included the time loop thing, with House messing with their heads, and Amy thinking Rory has aged quite a lot, even to the point where it seems that Rory has died again. Yay. I think it should have been Amy that time. I think it would have made a lot more sense if Amy had been the one to turn out to have been killed, especially as Rory keeps dying in these ones. Actually, funny enough, aged Rory in the second time the time loop happens, well, he's been waiting for another 2,000 years, or at least a very long time by his aged look, where that outburst of him towards Amy, that's exactly how I feel about Stephen Moffat writing their relationship in Asylum of the Daleks. How could you do that to them? That scene that's almost like Neil Gaiman has looked into the future and is writing that, directing that towards Stephen Moffat. Interesting. Of course, he probably doesn't know about what will come next series, and at this point, of course, and well, at time recording, we know what comes up next series, but in terms of retrospective, we wouldn't have, if you know what I mean. At this moment in 2020, I don't know what's going to happen in series 13, 14, and 15, but by 2025, I will, hopefully. So yeah, time doesn't always make sense. Anyway, so Amy and Rory eventually make it to a old TARDIS console room. In fact, the 2005 to 10 one. And the Doctor and Idris manage to get their junk TARDIS to arrive in that TARDIS, and are able to save Amy and Rory from Nephew, who is now also on board the TARDIS and is being used by House. Sadly, once again, the Ood are being possessed by an evil force, and this one does not make it, as he's then as the junk TARDIS lands where he was, so which basically means he's now become the heir. Well, that's a shame. And I think this is the last proper Ood appearance. There might be a few cameos later down the line, but I think this is the last proper Ood appearance of the show. Oh, hang on. Besides Pond Life. Oh, okay. The final Ood Doctor Who story. If Pond Life counts, then okay, we end on a good note with the Ood. Well, some more or less. But besides Pond Life, I think this is it. Besides cameos, so yeah. It would have been nice to have the U team up with the Doctor for Demon's Run, wouldn't it? So anyway, but eventually House tries to get rid of them by deleting that console rooms. Hopefully the TARDIS still has the record of that on somewhere. But because the TARDIS can't delete rooms with people inside, well, it can delete the rooms, but the people automatically transferred to the main control room, and therefore Idris is allowed to release the TARDIS energy from herself and back into the TARDIS, killing House. But we also get one last final moment where the Doctor and the TARDIS say goodbye, and then the TARDIS returns to being how it was before the adventure of this story. And the emotion in this scene, I think that's a Hunger Games thing. Just absolutely wonderful. But we do end the episode on a happy note, as the Doctor is still able to talk to the TARDIS. He just can't talk in a conversation sense. He's just talking towards the machine. And the TARDIS seems to be able to control the controls, as it's able to have that big pulley thing, a roundy pulley one down where which the Doctor uses to set the TARDIS to dematerialize, and off it goes. That goes down, and they head off to the Isle of Orion, or wherever they need to go. Because it's revealed in this episode, the TARDIS always took the Doctor where he needed to go. Not always where he wanted, but always where he needed to go. So, the Doctor's wife, absolutely brilliant. I'll get some negatives out the way first. Firstly, Auntie and Uncle aren't the best of characters. They're good for what they are here, and I like that they're all patchwork people of different Time Lords that have been brought through the plug hole into this bubble universe. And in the Corsair's left arm is used for Auntie, and the kidneys and the spine for Uncle. Um, so I like the different patchwork people there, but the personalities themselves, they're good for what they are. They're not the best of supporting characters or the best of supporting actors, but they're still good for what they are. It's better than some of the characters from the last couple of episodes. Um, and some of the ones in the next couple of episodes as well, come to think of that. So, yeah, I think they're decent. I think we could have a bit more of them, and they do just die because House is gone and that's it. They just pop off. But they're decent for what they are. The only other criticism I have is the pull to open sign on the door reference, where the TARDIS or Idris is having a go at the Doctor for pulling the door, pushing the door open instead of pulling it. He ignoring the signs. But that sign on the door is for the phone bit where you open the little cupboard thingy thing with the fake phone calling. That sign is for that. Pull this bit this mini little door to open, and you have the phone. Some older police boxes probably did pull to open outside, but this is the Doctor's TARDIS. It's a broken chameleon circuit, which means it's not supposed to look like a proper police box, or at least not be completely the same. It can look very similar to it, but it doesn't have to look completely the same. It can look a little bit different. That's why the windows are a bit wrong, and why some of it sometimes it's a bit too big and bulky, or a bit too thin and squeezy, a little bit too tall or a little bit too short. The exteriors mix and match depending on the TARDIS. But it doesn't have to be completely perfect because it's a broken chameleon circuit. So that makes sense, and it makes sense for the Doctor's TARDIS to be an exception to usual police boxes with pushing the doors. Problem is, it's the fact that the Doctor's TARDIS isn't supposed to be like a regular police box, as well as the fact that that sign may actually be referencing the phone hatch bit itself. And lastly, this isn't so much of a criticism, but I think, to be honest, these haven't been actual criticisms. They've been more nitpicks. The last nitpick is Amy and Rory are sent off to do their own thing, but I do think it's handled really well. What House does with them, like I said, I think it should have been Amy who died instead of Rory, because Rory keeps dying off, especially after the last story where he almost died again. But I still think that bit was handled really well, and I think Neil Gaiman wrote those scenes brilliantly. And Richard Clark, who returns from directing the series 3 stories, Gridlock and the Lazarus Experiment, and did a really good job with those 2 stories, especially Gridlock. He does a really great job with directing these corridor scenes. I also, that's my nitpicks. Onto the positives. So before we do, apparently there was about a quarter of an hour of footage that was not used for this episode. Some of that may have been TARDIS corridor scenes, so I think those were incorporated well. But there are a few instances where it does look like there's been a few reaction shots missed. But thankfully, they do manage to edit the episode into 46 minutes, including the credits and the trailer, really well. There are a few editing hiccups in some places in the corridor scenes, but I don't think they're too problematic. I think I can live with them. Not too much of a problem. Also, I don't know if it's in this episode, but certainly in this series and in the big ones in the Big Bang, we've got the whizzy panny shots that I kept complaining about in series 3 and 4. They've made a comeback this series, and one used in the Big Bang, but in the Big Bang, that was all right. It wasn't too bad. But it was either Christmas Carol or The Impossible Astronaut, where it then came back again, and I think it's been used in those episodes, Day of the Moon and Curse of the Black Spot, and might have been used here. I don't think they were used in the Gang of Two-parter, though. But Whizzy Panny shots have made us a comeback, even if a brief comeback, so hopefully we'll lose them again in the next half of the series, but yeah, and if there was one here, then... But that's about it for nitpicks. And onto the positives. Matt Smith is absolutely outstanding. This is probably his best performance so far. Suranne Jones is a great supporting guest cast member as Idris, and she has fantastic chemistry with Matt Smith. And if the TARDIS could have a human body version, even if it's just a hologram, just to talk to the Doctor, I would be absolutely happy with Saran Jones being a regular of the TARDIS, or a semi-regular of the TARDIS's humanoid hologram version. Karen Gillan and Arthur Darvill are also really great as Amy and Rory in this episode, and it is great that they do get some focus when they're away from the Doctor, and they get to have some fun with House, voiced by Michael Sheen, who's absolutely brilliant. And whilst the Ood doesn't get to speak, I think Paul Casey does I think it's Paul Casey in the Ood costume, does a great job as per usual as the monster. And it's great to have the Ood back once more, even though he's a villain Ood this time around, like in the Impossible Planet Satan Pit. But it's still great to have the Ood, and the actors who do Auntie and Uncle do well for what they have. It's not a very big cast this time round. It's really the 3 main characters and 5 guest cast members, one of which is a voice only, and another doesn't get any lines. Well, not any lines of themselves. They have the transmissions from the Time Lord messages, and then the House speaks through it, and then there's a bit where it pretends to be Rory's voice as well, probably. So it's so we really only have 5 guest characters in this one. One of them is voice only, and one of them doesn't speak at all, and they all do really well in their respective roles. It's also worth mentioning that junk TARDIS I showed you earlier, I've put it back now, it was designed in a Blue Peter competition, and I think it was the winner of the 8 to 10s, or some the oldest of the 3 competitions. I think it was 5 to 8, 8 to 10. I'm not quite sure, but there was it was a Blue Peter competition, design a TARDIS console room, and they brought the winners of each sections of the competition depending on age, and then I think it was the winner of the oldest one got their TARDIS. It was the overall winner, and that got made. Originally, I think this story was supposed to be a Series 5 script, but it got moved to Series 6, and the competition itself came around October 2009, but now this episode is being included into Series 6. This TARDIS is now being made as the TARDIS the Doctor and Idris used to get onto the actual TARDIS, and even the winner of the competition even got to be on set when they were building the TARDIS, and got to see what it's like. May even have seen some of the filming. So, well, congratulations to her. It was a girl about age 8 to 10, or is it 11 to 13? I'm not quite sure. There might have been a 6 to 8, 8 to 10, and then 10 to 12 competition. So she might have been 10, 11, 12. Can't quite remember entirely, but nevertheless, that TARDIS got to appear on screen. And if I may say so, it's a pretty good TARDIS. It certainly works as a one-off TARDIS. I don't think it'd be that spectacular as a regular TARDIS. Then again, I could hear some people saying that about the 2010 TARDIS, to be honest. The interior, of course, and the exterior is a different matter. But I think this is definitely a great one-off, this TARDIS design. It definitely takes the childhood imagination as part of that. And you know, I would be absolutely fine if any of these Blue Peter competition enterers, anyone who entered this competition, I would be happy to have them work on a future TARDIS console if that's what they wanted to go into later in life, designing TARDIS consoles. So I would be absolutely happy with any of them, especially this winner, because she did a really great job with the design, and I think the design got translated to screen really well. So overall, The Doctor's Wife is absolutely fantastic. Fantastic story, fantastic characters, fantastic acting and performances, fantastic sets and locations, and just an outright brilliance. There's a few little nitpicks, and there's a few editing niggles. Not too bad. It's not terrible editing. It's just a little niggles, a few little niggles. One bit is where Amy's screaming at the dead Rory, and we get about 2 or 3 different shots at the same time, and it's like, stop it. We just have to hold on that reaction for a moment. Could have saved a few seconds by just holding on the same shot. There's only a few little niggles, editing niggles, in the corridor bits. For the most part, the editing is superb, as per usual. And overall, this episode is just absolutely fantastic. So I will be giving The Doctor's Wife a 10 out of 10. yeah, I just love this episode. It gets everything right, apart from a few tiny editing niggles and a few other little things that I have nitpicked, but none of those derail the story, and it's all, even the execution in those editing those bits about the editing. It's only a few little niggles, not enough to be called terrible editing, and the episode is really well edited elsewhere. So yeah, it's really, if it was really bad editing, then this story would not be a 10 out of 10. It probably would have gone down a little bit. But thankfully, it's only a few niggles, not too much of a problem. It can be ignored. It could be better, but it could be ignored. But anyway, so that was a fantastic story. Whew. And also a few things to take away from this one going forward with the series arc. Idris, the TARDIS, tells Rory about the only water in the river, only water in the forest is the river. That's going to come into play with Series 7. Rory mentions this to the Doctor and Amy at the end. And also, this is, along with the Pandoric Opens, this is one of the earlier times we see the swing being used, the swing under the TARDIS. Nice. And also, we have the mention of petrichor being the smell of dust after rain, which will be the perfume in Closing Time that Amy is modelling for. We'll get to that when we get there. It's also nice in the bit where Amy's thinking telepathically, and this will also come into play in Let's Kill Hitler with the sonic screwdriver. When she's trying to do the telepathic for the code to get into the 9th and 10th Doctor's TARDIS console room. When she's imagining that, she's got Crimson, her 11th birthday, and then a shot from her wedding when she's happy. Probably when she was laughing at her mother's joke in that bit. So it's nice to see that when she's thinking of joy, I believe it was, or happy times, she's thinking of her wedding day as opposed to Adventures with the Doctor, and that is pretty nice. And then having to put petrichor as the smell of dust after rain, which will then link into, Closing Time will reference it as a nice little nod to this episode. So, yeah, we got a couple of things that are going to be used to get a few things here that are going to be mentioned again later on, with the only water in the forest is the river bit being a big part towards the end of A Good Man Goes to War. So, we'll find out what that's about in 3 episodes' time. But before we get to that one, first of all, we have the Rebel Flesh and the Almost People. I said I would probably do a rant for that story in my Impossible Astronaut Day of the Moon one, and I probably might. I mean, maybe not as much as I thought I was going to be, but it still might be. I'm going to do that momentarily. But for you guys, that'll be tomorrow. So in the meantime, thank you for watching my review of The Doctor's Wife, and I'll see you guys next time for my review / potential rant, or well, probably might have some ranty bits at least, on the Rebel Flesh and the Almost People. Goodbye. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Nicholas Payne Retro YouTube channel. So, mentioning the Beta Corsair being a pretty, and goes into more detail, a little bit of detail on the 13th Doctor Titan comic bit, and goes into a bit of detail. When reacting. Also, this episode shows their relationship on a high note, despite the head house messing with their heads. But they forget about this. Actually, I don't know. I won't worry about that. I'll address it when I get to Asylum of the Daleks. Is my footage okay? Footage is a bit odd. And then but we end on a happy note as the Doctor seems to be. But we do end the episode on a happy note, and so, but we do end. And if it was one of the TARDIS, I think my main issue is that I think I can live with them, blah blah blah. Excuse me. So, yeah, and yeah, that they do really. So overall, with some great production, and I love that the juncture. It's also worth noticing that it's all for but I can't quite remember entirely, but nevertheless, and is if they had to retake it, I then use a retake. But nevertheless, I still think this. But besides a few editing nitpicks during the corridor, some of the corridor stuff, not all of it, just some of it, I think it's still a really. But that's it. But before we get to that, we now come to the. But before we get to that episode next time, well, after one masterpiece must come a bit of dung by an animal. But before we get to that one, we've got